Hi, welcome to another episode of the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm Steve Richardson, a bankruptcy attorney trying to keep people on their path to financial stability and independence through education. If someone is having emotional, mental, or social problems, you might send them to therapy. But what if they're having financial problems? Is there any such thing as financial therapy? Well, according to Wendy Wright, a therapist and money coach, there is. That's why in this episode of the podcast, I wanted to talk to her about what financial therapy is and how it can help people to change their thinking about money, communicate it better with their spouse, and get out of debt. My guest today is Wendy Wright, a leading financial therapist and the CEO of Financial Therapy Solutions. With a background as a licensed therapist, money coach, and business owner, Wendy excels in merging psychological insights with financial expertise. Her work in the field of financial therapy has transformed lives by addressing the emotional aspects of financial decision making. Today, we're going to talk to her about how to achieve a harmonious relationship with money and navigate the complexities of financial well-being. Welcome to the show, Wendy.
Thanks, Stephen. It's so good to be here. I get very excited when I get to talk about financial therapy because it's still so new.
Yeah, I hadn't heard the expression before.
Mhm.
It's not new, and you've trademarked it, I see. So we'll certainly talk about it. But that's what intrigued
Mhm.
me about what you do and why I wanted to have you on the show. So let's look at that. Uh, but I found that when it comes to money, a lot of times it's all about mindset. Before you get to the
Mhm.
budgets, before you get to a lot of the things that people talk about when it comes to finances, all the Dave Ramsey stuff, and nothing against Dave Ramsey, but that the nitty gritty stuff there. You got to go to mindset first, and I've done some other episodes on the mindset issue, and mindset can have a major impact on someone's financial freedom. Uh, how do you recommend that someone shift their money mindset to improve their relationship with money?
Yeah. Well, first is to know that you have a money mindset. So it's so fantastic that you are bringing that phrase to your audience, that you are acknowledging that it is, because a lot of times what I find is my clients will compartmentalize money as this special area that they just should know, and then they'll understand maybe they have other mindset that they may have emotions and things in other categories, but money gets walled off and is and until that instinct and intuition comes in that, oh, no, it's a mindset, it's a the intuition that it is highly psychological, that there are a lot of emotions involved. So to shift a money mindset, I think the very first step in that is awareness, is to say, okay, I have one. Two of the very common ones that come up for people, for instance, are you'll hear a lot of people talk about a scarcity mindset, which tends to lead with what I call thoughts that are beliefs, but may or may not be truths. So mindsets often can be full of this, such as a scarcity mindset is full of thoughts, beliefs that there's never enough, right? But that is actually not a truth. But as long as we live as if it's a truth, we make decisions accordingly. So it's helpful to see that. And then another common kind of mindset thought pattern that I find is that someone will think they are bad with money. And I use air quotes around bad because I don't actually believe people are bad with money. I think there are, when we see that as not a truth, we can look at it as okay, there are things you don't enjoy about your relationship with money. There are things you wish you did differently. There are things you would like to do differently. So as we start to open up space for change, we can come out of some of these beliefs that are really, like when people use the phrase money blocks, because a lot of times people will say, I hear people talk about money blocks, but what is that? it can be like this belief that has you blocked in that is actually not a truth. So when we work through, that's why my course is called Money Mindset Shift. Like, it's really like awareness is such the big first step. Awareness that you have one, and then awareness that it can change. So that is sort of how I would drop a pin on how do we start the process.
Well, you talked about a scarcity mindset, but there's also an abundance mindset.
Mhm.
Uh,
Yeah.
and it seems to me that both of them can hold you back, because in a scarcity
Yes.
mindset, your mindset is there isn't enough money, and you tend to
Hmm.
become very tight fisted. And
Yes.
that can interfere with quality of life. There's actually more money available to you
Yeah.
that you might use to, whether it's long-term savings and goals like retirement. Say, well,
Hmm.
there's extra money, put that away towards retirement, or put it into an emergency fund, or put it into just something to have fun. So now,
Yeah.
hey, go out, do things, have fun with your money. You're entitled, you saved it, you're good with money, you watch every dollar, and that
Hmm.
helps. So you don't, a scarcity money mindset doesn't exactly make you feel free.
Right.
And the other problem with an abundance mindset is you
Hmm.
think there's more money there than there really is. And I think that's how
Hmm.
people get into credit card debt and things like that, because they have, oh, there will always be more money. I'll get a raise, I'll get a bonus, whatever it is. They think
Hmm.
there's more money there than there is. Would you agree? Is there anything else you would want to add with regard to the
Oh,
abundance
yeah.
mindset?
Well, first, I appreciate you acknowledging that, because sometimes I surprise people when I say there are actually issues with an abundance mindset too, because it is not the golden ticket that sometimes it can be presented as. Because often, let's look at a couple of key things, like you said. An abundance mindset tends to have some beliefs such as there will always be enough money. Now, when it comes down to money behaviors, which is where the psychology comes in, this can look the same. It's like you're coming in two different doors: an abundance mindset and a scarcity mindset. Neither one of them are going to ask for a raise, because the scarcity mindset is like, well, the company doesn't have enough money. Or the abundance mindset is, well, the company will tell me when I get, it's like they put it off. So it's actually, what we want to look at is what behaviors are coming up that are getting in your way. So maybe you're not asking for a raise. Maybe you're not saving for retirement because you'll quote unquote figure it out later. Things like that too. So yes, it's really, to me, it's so helpful to look at, there is no perfect with money. And this is really, really hard because a lot of my clients are perfectionists. And when I say there's no perfect with money, that can be very upsetting. But once you accept it and understand that flexibility is a big part of creating, I use words more like a satisfying relationship with money, a confident relationship with money. We want to look for a path to get to those. So yes, I definitely can agree with your thoughts there.
So we have the scarcity mindset and we have the abundance mindset.
Hmm.
But at some point, when it comes to the right mindset about money, it's somewhat individualistic. It's
Hmm.
that person, it's that person's situation. How do
Hmm.
people get to, the Goldilocks solution? What's
Right.
just right
Hmm.
for them between those two mindsets, and then stay
Hmm.
within that mindset going forward?
Oh yeah. It's very keywords you said there. It's it's individualized, and that's super important, because we can use a lot of the same words sometimes to represent something but mean something different. So let's say we have two people, maybe they're in a partnership, because often they may be, who both say, I want to buy a house. But what that can mean to them is totally different things. Like, for one of them, buying a house may be sort of the icon, the representation of money success. Well, then they need to look, we want to help them look through, like, where did that story start? How did that become it? And what are the numbers? Because it's so far, they've just said, I want to buy a house. And then we have to look at the numbers, but we want to look at those numbers softly and compassionately. Whereas their partner may say, I want to buy a house. And what they mean is they want to buy a 5-bedroom house. They want to house hack it and have 4 people living there. And then they want to sell it in 6 months and buy the next one. But they both said the same sentence: I want to buy a house, right? So we
Right.
want to get to what is the individual story. And then we also, I've created 10 principles of financial therapy, and I teach from these quite a bit. And the first one is absolutely has to come first. The rest, I don't care what order they come in. But the first one is abundant, compassionate curiosity and zero judgment. And when we really begin to layer that on our money words and our money story and our money goals, then we can connect to what is that deeper story. And if, for instance, buying a house has equaled success, then when we look at that without any judgment on that, because someone may come in that and, well, that doesn't mean success, but it does to this person. We want to come in, we want to softly look at that and say, well, who defined that for you? So maybe there's a past here that we want to look at. And I always like to say, because therapy on sitcoms and things like that, they're always saying, tell me about your childhood. But the reason in financial therapy specifically, and other therapy, but we look back, I always say we look back for context, not to sit and hold blame somewhere. Because if you just sit with the blame, and maybe there is some trauma, there is financial trauma, and we want to work through that, but that can get you stuck. So we want to look for context and be like, oh, that's where I learned this. And now look forward. Here's what I want to do in my life. And I call that owning your own money, or how do you want, what story do you want your money to tell? And that helps people begin to put different words to it and move forward and make those shifts.
Hmm. Well, it seems to me that in order to reform a mindset, you need to know where the original one came from. It's not
Yeah.
about blame. It's a lot of time
Mhm.
people, as they grow up, they get their mindset from their parents, and their parents may have
Mhm.
misconceptions about money. And they say,
Mhm.
well, I'm this way because of X. And you say to them, well, X really isn't true.
Mhm. Mhm.
There, or there's a way around X. And I would think they'd be rather surprised that, you mean I don't have to deal with X?
Yeah.
It seems to me
Yeah.
that that
Yeah.
would be transformative. So,
Yeah.
all right. So we've talked about different money mindsets and how to find the right
Mhm.
one and work towards it. Uh,
Mhm.
but we're here to talk about financial therapy.
Okay.
So why don't you give me sort of the Wikipedia definition of
Okay.
financial therapy and how it helps
Mhm.
change and heal someone's relationship with money?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I tell you, I've been a therapist for over 20 years, and I've been really focused on financial therapy for probably almost a decade of that now, because what I began to find in doing general therapy and also eating disorder therapy, specifically eating disorder therapy, because I was a specialist in that, or am, I began to see people switch out behaviors from maybe food or exercise behaviors to money behaviors, and they were using the same words. And so was like, hey, there's something to this. Now, I also have a business background. I was a mortgage banker, and I have these others. So I think unlike, there's a lot of therapists that just want to cry and crawl under the desk as soon as money is brought up. And I know them that, I'm not talking trash about them. Like, a lot of them are just like, I don't want to talk about money. So I love it. I consider myself a money nerd. So I love talking about it. So when I started seeing this emotional connection and found there is a financial therapy association, there's still, I think, less than 100 of us. Like maybe there's 150 now. There's not that many people doing it yet, but there's room for more, because when you come into a therapeutic setting, and the shorthand of therapeutic setting is, we're not going to judge anything. So when you come in, imagine being able to talk to someone about money where there's no judgment. Then you get to tell your story, then you get to heal it. And that is sort of financial therapy in a nutshell, is the intersection of money and emotions. So it is noticing, validating that intuition that, yes, the majority of my financial decisions are emotionally based. And then you get to, again, not judge the emotions, but then you get to, instead of reacting, you get to have more intention. Like one of my first exercises with people is a little intentional shopping trip. It's like a 3 or 4 minute video and some exercises to drop in more intention if they have found themselves shopping impulsively. So it's like taking these things, dropping in some intentions, maybe just some deep breaths, something to slow the reactivity, And this is where my clients will come to me and they'll say, I have to admit, I thought this was impossible, but I am now experiencing change. My money mindset is shifting, and it's fantastic.
Well, you mentioned the emotional aspect of it. There's a principle in marketing that says people make decisions emotionally and then
Hmm.
justify them with logic. Now,
Yes,
obviously,
absolutely.
in the marketing sphere, you're
Hmm.
playing to those emotions.
Yes.
But here, in dealing with financial therapy, you're seeing how those emotions helping or hurting you
Yeah.
in your finances. Now, what you said that was interesting, you said that in being a therapist, you found a lot of uh, issues of therapy,
Hmm.
applied to the financial realm. What were you seeing in regular
Hmm.
therapy, as it
Right.
were,
Hmm.
that was
Yeah.
translating over and where you started seeing this pattern with finances?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, for instance, with eating disorder work, for instance, I would see, and I have this in a workbook called The Intersection of Money and Milkshakes that I've done and presented on, because this is a deal. It's a big deal. But what I would find, for instance, is someone with an eating disorder might say, whatever the eating disorder behavior was, whether it was not eating or binging and purging, they would be like, well, I've got to do this to lose weight. And then, of course, then we say, well, what will losing weight bring you? It'll bring me acceptance, or I'll be connected to people, or I'll have friends, or something like that. Because there's always something underneath driving it. And then I found they would switch this because they would then start shopping, perhaps when they weren't using the eating disorder behaviors, they'd start shopping. And I'd say, okay, well, let's pull this up. And we'd pull up the website and look at the shirt they were buying. And I'd say, what was leading you to this shirt? And they said, well, so people would accept me. I wouldn't look fat. I would be respected. It was like the same words were being used. And I was like, something's up here. So then I really started to help. So when I'm helping someone, particularly with shopping, and any of your listeners welcome to do this. Let's say they're shopping for something. Often, if they write down what it is they're longing for, so maybe they're putting this blue shirt in their cart and they think about it a lot, and then they begin to write down, what will this shirt bring me? Maybe they're like, well, when I go to do this presentation at work, they'll take me more seriously because I have a shirt from this store, or whatever it may be.
Mhm.
Or maybe they're about to do something stressful, like like go home for the holidays. So maybe they find themselves shopping for either like super snuggly throws or jackets or slippers that they can wear when they're at the family home during the holidays, because they expect to be stressed. But they don't realize that until we stop and talk about it and be like, what is coming up for you when you're putting this in your cart? So whatever it may be, when we start looking at what that is, or couples, a lot of times they'll try to communicate something through a financial thing, but they're not using the words. So we want to put the words to it.
Well, sounds to me like you're trying to, identify going from retail therapy to
Mm-hmm.
financial therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And people talk about retail therapy and it's like comfort
Mm-hmm.
eating, but they're
Right.
comfort shopping. That
Right.
that they feel that it's maybe a corollary to the bright shiny object syndrome or
Mm-hmm.
the magic purple pill syndrome. If only
Yeah.
I purchased this, if only I did
Yes.
this, that would get me what I
Then.
need. And
Mm-hmm.
there creates a disconnect in their mind
Mm-hmm.
as to why they're buying things, and they're buying emotionally rather than
Mm-hmm.
logically, and they need to be more intentional about their spending, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and getting that deeper understanding about what's going on helps them begin to make changes, because until they understand why they might be purchasing what they're purchasing, they'll protect those purchases quite a bit.
Mhm.
And that's where we come into number avoidance, because part of what I do in financial therapy is, because I work virtually across the world, so it's Zoom meeting kind of things, and we'll log in. They'll log into their bank account and we'll talk about, because maybe they haven't logged in for months because they don't want to look.
Right.
Because until you know what your there can be a fear that you'll like never be able to get whatever it is again, or there's just a lot of thoughts and feelings that come up, that once we look at those, then they can start to look, and then my clients start to make more intentional financial decisions, and that it's pretty exciting.
Mhm. Well, it sounds to me like that when they start trying to, like I said, they buy with emotion
Mm-hmm.
but justify with logic, they start seeing
Mm-hmm.
maybe some logical fallacies, and maybe they need to, think about, well, maybe you can't justify this logically, and
Mm-hmm.
you need
Mm-hmm.
to, where you, or maybe make more purchasing decisions with logic rather than emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, all right. So we've talked about financial mindset, and we've talked
Mm-hmm.
about what financial therapy is. Uh, but we've been talking about the individual and what the
Mm-hmm.
individuals. But when you're married, you've got two people. If you're
Mm-hmm.
married or you're in a committed relationship, that mindset has to go beyond just you. And oftentimes, finances can be the cause of divorce or other family
Mm-hmm.
problems and stress. I've talked to some of my family law colleagues, and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, money troubles are a common source for divorce. So there needs to be that communication. There needs to be that commonality of mindset. When each of you says, "I want to buy a house," what do you mean by that?
Right. Right.
So
Unpacking it.
how can a financial therapy
Mm-hmm.
approach help someone figure out how to talk to their loved ones or partners about money and get to the same page?
Yeah. It's super helpful, first of all, I will say. And it's also most impactful when both members of the partnership come in with affection and commitment toward each other.
Mhm.
Sometimes people will want to come into financial therapy just like they go into other couples therapy, where they just want me to tell the other one how to behave. And then when I say I don't do that, they don't come back, because that's, it's not part of what we want to do here. But it's super exciting and powerful when the couple comes in. Now, one of the things that I sort of foundationally, and I tell them this right off the bat, because I don't want them waiting for the whammy. I don't want them to wait for, when is Wendy going to say, "Oh, you are the problem." So it's like, and that energy is there. But I really like to look at this as very much like a Venn diagram with the overlapping circles, and to have yours, mine, and ours money. And also, they tend to have a yours, mine, and ours mindset. So
Mm.
it's really helpful for them to do, like my money mindset course. I actually have a caveat or a note on it that I don't recommend couples do it together. I recommend they first figure out your own money mindset, figure out where you want to go with that, because the change of it is very possible. It's usually in small increments. And then you come to something, and then come together as a couple and to say, well, what do we want our united money mindset to be? And it may be different words and it may be similar words, but it's kind of like, in business, we like to do mission statements and things like that. But for a couple, I think it's really powerful to put the words down, because what happens is, well, let's go back to that buying a house example. I said one wants to buy a house because that says success. The other one wants to buy it, house hack it, buy another one. But that still was to say success. So they both are coming at it in that example to say, I'm a financial success. So maybe that's where they want to come together, and let's put some different words to that, so that I have perhaps financial stability, financial growth, a path for growth mapped out. Okay, so let's just use those three things. If those are three things, they can come together as a couple and say, yeah, then they can go back to their buying a house purchase and say, okay, what of this is to do stability, growth, whatever. So by expanding the communication, decreasing the reactivity, and understanding what's the meta message to a financial comment or transaction, those three things can really help couples come together. And what I find often for them is, as we enhance and unpack this communication, they have more satisfaction, and they're able to problem solve, because that's, a lot of it. When one of my principles actually of financial therapy is that we take the money word out of the sentence. So like you're saying, if the family law attorneys are saying, or if a couple is saying we got divorced because of money, I'll have them take that money word out and tell me why you got divorced, because it's probably something like disrespect, control, inability to communicate, feeling disconnected. But if we hook it all on money, it oversimplifies what happened. So with couples, and sometimes in a session, I'll say, okay, let's take that money word out. And it may take them literally 10 minutes to come up with no, they're like, no, it's money, it's money, it's money. And I'm like, okay, let's take that word out. And then they come up to, I feel I want to control, or I feel out of control, or disrespect, or something. There's something else going on there. So coming in from that financial therapy door and looking at it, understanding it, and can really help increase that ability to communicate and make those changes.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed in my bankruptcy practice and talking to married couples, and I'm sure
Mhm.
you've seen it too, and a lot of other financial advisors, where uh, they're they're sort of two different camps. And I'm not saying one's better than
Mhm.
the other, or one's right or one's wrong, but some couples come in and say they get married and they pool their money. They have a joint bank account, they have a joint
Mhm.
savings account. Others, this is my money, this is your money. You pay
Mhm.
these bills out of your money, I pay these bills out of my money. Do you find that those two approaches uh, say different things about money
Yeah.
mindset? What do you see
Mhm.
come up in your financial therapy when it comes to those two approaches to marital money?
Yeah, yeah. Well, first I'll agree with you. There's not a right or wrong. So a lot of couples, especially in the last, I'd say 40 years, they have kind of lost the script, because they don't have the husband works, the wife is the homemaker, kind of like that used to be the script. It was easy to follow. Couples today are making their own path, and I validate that for them. Most of my couples are creating something they have no example of, so they come in with some instinct, but then they're not happy because it's not really working. So we look at it first of all with abundant compassionate curiosity and zero judgment. What I find is usually there's a reason for either the total combine or the total separation. Often there's either like some fear or some shame or some unspoken, like, I'm not sure how we're supposed to do this. So once we start talking about it in terms of, like I said, coming into that couple, that partnership value statement is kind of, like, okay, we want a stability, we want growth, we want whatever. Like, when they come to that and then they have that to pull from, then they are more able to say, okay, well, maybe we'll have a joint account for these things, but we both want our own account for, I want to, go fishing, I want to go to yoga, I want to buy you a present and not have you know. And so maybe they want their own account for some stuff. So there's like that part, but they come to it with communication, and with validation on that. And so that is kind of how they begin to come together with that. So, but I think one of the first things to ask is, do you feel satisfied with the current setup? Because often that they don't. And that's why we want to look at it and see. And again, it's also really important to tell them there's not a perfect way to do it, because that is a big part of, another principle of financial therapy, is really recognizing the money work's never done, because we want to introduce a lot of flexibility, because then maybe something changes. Maybe one stays home with a child, or one takes a sabbatical or something. So then they want to have sort of principles within which to make new decisions. And that way they know they're still on the same page.
Yeah, and it sounds to me like there's no right or wrong between the two approaches, but the
Mhm.
reasons that people have for one or the other might be faulty, might be destructive to a healthy money
Mhm.
mindset. Would you say that's a
Mhm.
fair statement?
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Without exploring the reasons behind it, you don't really know, what's going on. And then a bill comes in, or it's time to buy a gift for someone, or plan a wedding, for instance. The one thing that I tell couples that are planning a wedding, because they feel like, oh, there's a lot of money stress. And then I say, okay, well, I want you to get one page out that you're going to write all the money stuff down. But at the top of it, I want you to write down, how do you want to feel at the end of the day? Because to me, that's the most important question.
Mhm.
And then they write that down, and then that helps guide where I'm going to put the money, where I'm going to put the resources. And so having them connect to the emotions helps them then make the decision, and it feels less reactive.
Sounds like more, Stephen Covey's principle of begin with the end in mind. If you know where
Yeah.
you're going, you know how you want to feel, or you have a good definition of what a good outcome would be, then that can direct and maybe create a little bit more flexibility. No, we have to have this type of flower as a centerpiece, or
Right. Right.
you're
Yes.
getting to, well, what's going to most likely to get us to that goal at the end of the wedding, when it's all over,
Yeah.
and you're off to your honeymoon, your children are off to their honeymoon. How are you going to feel, and how are you going to define success?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we talked about that as far as marriage
Mhm.
communication and relationships. Uh, some of my listeners may be struggling to get out of debt, and I've talked about in several episodes different ways of doing that.
Mhm.
And obviously, getting out of debt is an early step towards financial freedom. How does
Mhm.
financial therapy help people stop the debt cycle, and what should people know before starting to pay off their debt?
I'm so glad you asked this question, and I really hope I surprise you with my answer, because, and I can only speak for me. I can't speak for any other financial therapist out there who's doing this, because I think they would approach it similarly. But to me, I will say, do not get out of debt until you know how to stay out of debt. And that's the work. So before we get into a rush, and I do explain snowballs and avalanches, and I mean, I live in Colorado. I'm a big skier, so of
That's one
course
of
I
my
have to.
common questions. I
Yeah,
call it the boxers or briefs question.
yes,
Is
exactly,
it snowball or
exactly. And
avalanche?
I have to talk about snow. I think that's always very important. But what I find to be more important is for us to look at the story behind the debt. And this
Uh-huh.
is hard. This is really hard. It's emotional. When it's an individual, there's often a lot of shame here. They feel, they feel so stupid. And when you feel stupid, that makes decisions for you. And so we want to put a lot of compassion around that. We want to get the judgment out of it. And then we want to begin to look at. So to me, the first step is to, first of all, no surprise, apply compassion, a lot of compassionate curiosity and zero judgment.
Mhm.
And then we want to look at what's the story. And this takes a lot of courage. Let's look at some of the debt, and let's look at some of the story behind the debt. Some of the, most people go into debt with very good intentions in the moment. So we want to look at that. Sometimes what we're really going to work on is forgiveness, for maybe that, maybe, for people, a lot of my clients who have, I was going to say struggle with, who struggle with student loans, have resentment toward themselves, maybe the staff member who signed them up for the debt. Maybe they resent that no one in their family said, hey, by the way, you might not want to do that. But that's okay. We want to name all that so that they can forgive, or and not have that hold them back. Because as long as you're mad about it, then you kind of are stuck there. So we want to process that grief. We want to look at it that way. And that also helps them look at, how could I have done this differently? So that's a big part of it. Looking at the story of the debt, looking at how can I do it differently? So while we're working on that, in the background, I have them just hold space, pay the minimums or very little more than that. Because often what's happened with a debt cycle is they make the debt, the next paycheck, they try to pay off that debt. 2 weeks later, they're out of money. So they create more debt. The next paycheck, they pay off that debt. 2 weeks later, they're out of, the cycle.
Right.
So we want to get out of the cycle, and we want to understand why, what's motivating, why are they making, what's going on under the decisions. So then one of my mentors, Karen McCall, coined the phrase saving your way out of debt. But then we start talking about their relationship to savings, which to me is a bigger issue than the debt. Because usually what's happening here is there's some beliefs, some mindsets that I can't save, or savings for other people, or a lot of my clients will really feel they can't save until they pay off the debt, because they're like, they need to be in timeout. But what that's doing is overall, it's blocking their ability to move forward in their life financially. So we really work on how to stay out of debt before you get out of debt. Because otherwise, if you hurry and get out of debt and you haven't thought this through, all of that available credit feels like free money again. So we want to talk that through. And that is really helps them get traction toward a new way of living.
Mhm.
What do you
And
think?
oh, absolutely. And I think it speaks to one of the things I've learned. I'm part of a business and marketing mastermind group. I mean, anybody who
Mhm.
owns their own business is an entrepreneur. And I think some
Yeah.
lawyers lose track of that sometimes, that they're also
Yeah.
business owners. But this group talks about constantly, the three levels that you need to think on is the meta level, the strategic level, and the tactical level. And from what you describe and what we've talked about here today, it sounds to me like people, when they try to get out of debt, are just starting at the tactical level. They're just saying, well,
Mhm.
I'm gonna pay off, this credit card. I'm gonna out of
Mhm.
this paycheck. And they're not thinking beyond that particular tactical move. But we
Mhm.
need to back up all the way to the meta level, which is our financial mindset.
Yeah.
So you start there, you correct the financial mindset and say, all right, now we're in the right headspace. Then you move to the strategic and you say, all right, I've got the right mindset, and now that's how I'm going to deal with my money. This is how I'm going to budget it, allocate it, things like that. And then you can use that strategic thought to determine how tactically you can pay it off. So,
Mhm.
as an example, you say, well, how much can I pay? Whether it's you have to figure out what your affordable monthly payment is, whether you're doing Snowball, which pays off the
Mhm.
smallest balances first, or Avalanche, which pays off the debt with the highest interest rate. How
Mhm.
much can you afford to pay per month, no matter which of the two you use? And how does that, because you can't determine that without strategically figuring out everything else in your finances. Then you can make the tactical move of saying, all right, I have this pool of money. How am I going to do this? Is it Snowball or it's Avalanche? Would you say
Mhm.
that's a fair
Yes.
summation, or?
Yeah, yeah. And I love that, the idea of those three different levels of thinking and approaching it and getting that, because it's that meta level where financial therapy is going to walk into. Absolutely. And then because I'm also a trained money coach, then I will, depending on what my client's wanting to work on, I can come in and help them set up those things and set up the snowball, because a big part of this is a forecast. If you look at your whole year at a time instead of just out the back window of last month. So
Mhm.
that's a big part of where I want to guide people to do. And when you do that, you see the whole picture change.
Mhm.
Instead of just feeling hyper focused on debt, you can start to feel encouraged.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So that it's getting out of debt, because you built up that, now you have to pay it off. Let's
Mhm.
look at the flip side. We've all heard of stories in the news or whatever. People get a big inheritance or they win the lottery,
Oh yeah.
and about a year or two later, they're broke.
Yes.
And there's a reason for that, I'm sure. And how can
Mhm.
financial therapy help people not deal with the debt that they're in, but the opposite problem, and we should all have,
Yes.
is how to deal with sudden wealth.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought this up too, because this is a big deal. And I have several clients that I'm working with on this, because and I think that the most recent research I've seen is the numbers like 70% of people who inherit wealth feel it's a burden, not a blessing. And
Mhm.
that's really important to pay attention to. So, the idea often the inherited wealth comes with very little communication about it. And sometimes it comes from somebody who was, I'll say mildly, not a positive person in your life. And,
Mhm.
so there's that too, like dealing with the emotions of who it came from. But let's just say, so money drops in your lap, and you don't really understand money. You don't really understand your mindset. And so a lot of times they will tend to either really avoid it and ignore it. And that then, so sometimes that means we've got more than the insured limit in a basic checking or savings account. So first I assess for safety. Basically, I say, okay, well, let's look at where it is and what it is, because sometimes they may have like $500,000 sitting at, the bank down the street. And so we want to talk about that. Sometimes they want to give it away. And when we really look at it, what's happening is they're actually pushing it away because they don't want to deal with it. And so it's helpful to really look at what's going on underneath the thought process. And one of the biggest things that I find that we work on in financial therapy as well is the identity shift. So usually they've come from, can be a big part of your identity if you're just making it paycheck to paycheck and you're working hard, or, you have a job you like, but then you get this money and you're not really sure who you are anymore or who you want to be. So that really impacts, again, a lot of avoidance or pushing it away. And the pushing it away can be like spending it really quickly or whatever, but so those two things, when they come into financial therapy and we can sit with the thoughts and feelings, because sometimes they really need to say, I am not happy about getting $1 million, but there's not a lot of people they can say that out loud to who won't be like, oh, it's a good problem to have. That's a
Or why
normal
don't you
response.
give it to me if you don't want
Right. I'll take it off your hand. Right. So having this sort of safe, non-judging place where they can come in and say, oh my gosh, this is just blowing me out of the water, then that really helps them. I've seen them really come to really begin to talk about it and begin to talk about the relationship with the person it came from. If that's impactful, whether maybe it was a negative relationship, or maybe it's just somebody they love so much, and spending the money is letting go of someone they love. And so they don't want to spend it. It's like, we've got to talk these things through, and financial therapy is a great place to do this. So understanding how do they, what I will say often, and listeners, y'all are welcome to do this, is to journal, what story do I want the money to tell? To really begin to own it and see the story they want it to tell helps this sort of like come in and not just feel like this thing that's a burden and they don't know how to do. It's scary. Often they don't know who to ask questions to, and they don't know how to think of it. So talking about it in financial therapy first. Sometimes I will help them make a list of questions to take to their financial planner. And for people who have a lot of anxiety or shame around this, I will tell them, I want you to limit, like we'll figure out, limit it to 2 questions a meeting and 20 minutes a meeting with your financial planner, because I know after 20 minutes, they're so activated, they're not hearing anything. So it depends on the client, but we'll role play it, we'll prepare it, we'll help them figure out who's on my financial team, because there's probably an attorney involved, a financial planner, all these things. And we'll role play it and help them figure out those questions, and to remember to breathe when they're there, because often that anxiety comes in and they forget what they want to ask and things like that. So that can be really helpful as well. But it is a really big deal. I'm so glad that you mentioned it, because it's very emotional and also not talked about a lot.
Well, a couple thoughts that I had as you were explaining that. One, if it's an inheritance, there may be a lot of guilt or loss that's mixed up with the money, where
Yes.
they're saying, I only have this money because I no longer have this person. And I'd
Right.
rather have the person than the money, which may cause them to push it away. But I think also, if you go all the way back to what we talked about initially in mindset, with a scarcity mindset or an abundance mindset, what it does, I would think, to the scarcity mindset is it blows their mind, because their thinking is the money isn't there, and suddenly it is.
Right.
So that's a conflict within their own mind that sort of contradicts and denies what they've always believed in a scarcity when there isn't one. Whereas with the abundance mindset, it's the eating disorder equivalent of an all-you-can-eat buffet, and now they're ramping up the retail therapy and everything else and spending through this money to address other emotional needs that they may not be aware of.
Yeah, it's very complex.
So, all right. So, lots of good information for people to think about. If some of our listeners are intrigued by the idea of financial therapy and want more information, or perhaps your help, how do you help people, and how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the website is financialtherapysolutions.com, and there is, you will find information there on the money mindset shift, which is a course, a foundational course of helping you identify and shift your money mindset.
Hmm.
And then also there will be, I do like quarterly master classes on different things. And the one this fall will be on some of the basics of financial therapy. And then I have like others that will be coming up for specifically for couples, and other kind of more specific stuff on some of the practical applications, like we talked about. So financialtherapysolutions.com, and that will take you to, and we'll provide links and things like that as well to find those abilities to help you heal your money story.
Mhm. For those of you driving while you're listening, no need to write all
Yes.
this down. I will have all of it in the show notes. So
Mhm.
you can go back and check that out if you want more information from Wendy. That's great. But thanks for coming on the show, Wendy, and thanks for telling us all
Yeah,
about financial therapy.
my pleasure. I always love telling people about it.
Mhm.